We're live.
Good evening, Professor Felber. This is group from SPCE611 from the East Coast. We are doing the behavior change replication study for increasing physical activity using self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback, which is a replication of Norman 2008. The purpose of this study was to replicate the findings of Norman 2008. The original study comprised of a single subject ABA reversal design. Independent variable was self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback. The dependent variable was physical activity in the form of number of steps taken per day. We utilized a pedometer with a visual readout, setting a goal with the researcher, and daily feedback during the intervention phase with the researcher. 4 participants, mixed results. Mean number of steps per day increased for all participants during intervention, but data was unstable. The method was 6 female graduate students enrolled in graduate course in advanced applied behavior analysis, all residing in the Eastern time zone in North America. Furthest north was Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and furthest south was Miami, Florida. All participants expressed the desire to increase their daily physical activity. Meetings took place via internet, and communication is completely via text and/or email. With the literature review.
Thank you. The following studies address at least one variable included in this study. Clapham, Sullivan, and Muscolo found that self-monitoring and performance feedback were effective in increasing physical activity in an elementary PE class. Through the use of heart rate monitors and pedometers, in combination with a supported curriculum, 106 suburban 4th and 5th graders were able to monitor levels of activity and receive feedback. Using a single subject ABA research design, Clapham found that throughout this 10-week study, levels of activity were increased. In our next study, Mativi, Dawson, and Tudorlock was a 4-week study to evaluate whether or not the use of a sealed or unsealed pedometer combined with self-monitoring would result in a change of behavior. Results determined that there were no significant differences in the mean number of steps per day in either condition. The outcome suggests that reactivity did not affect the validity of using pedometers and self-monitoring to assess physical activity in healthy adults. The next study by Wack, Crossland, and Miltenberger found that goal setting and performance feedback were effective in increasing running distance in adults. Short-term goals were set by each participant as well as one long-term goal. Researchers used weekly meetings with the participants to discuss progress that was recorded through the use of an electronic tracking device, the Nike Plus Sport Kit. This study supports the use of goal setting and performance feedback as an effective intervention. Our next study by Van Wormer was a study to assess whether pedometer-aided self-monitoring and brief e-counseling would increase the activity in 3 overweight adults. Participants were instructed to record daily steps, and the weight was recorded the first day of baseline and every Friday thereafter. Results from the study concluded that all participants increased their daily steps and had even lost weight over the course of the study. This study suggests that the use of a pedometer is an effective tool to utilize and increase physical activity. Goal setting and receiving positive feedback was found to be beneficial, providing motivation for the participants in this study. In a study from Snyder, Bassett, Thompson, Pronk, and Belock, they evaluated whether setting daily step goals would increase physical activity in overweight adults. Through the use of pedometers, adults tracked their daily steps and increased their baseline average of 5,000 steps to an average of over 10,000 steps per day by the end of the study. Only 50% of the participants were able to consistently meet the 10,000 steps daily. So in conclusion, researchers determined that 10,000 daily steps was not feasible for all adults, and further research could focus on analyzing variables that affect pedometer-based physical activity programs. The last study that we found was by Donaldson and Normand, and it used goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback in a 14-week course to teach 5 participants the benefits of exercise and healthy eating. Through the use of a heart rate monitor, researchers were able to record participants' heart rates during baseline. During intervention, daily goals were set 10% above baseline average numbers, and participants were able to monitor their own numbers. Participants were required to send daily graphs to the researcher and receive daily feedback. 2 of the participants withdrew when they were to return to baseline. In conclusion, researchers found that self-monitoring and goal setting were effective tools for some of the participants, and daily feedback was effective for some of the participants as well. And in our next slide, materials that we used throughout our study, we needed the following materials, sorry. The first material needed was a pedometer. Our group determined that using a Fitbit would be the best tool to use to track our steps. We chose the Fitbit because we were able to sync our Fitbits to an app that allowed others to monitor our progress when we were not able to during baseline. The tape was necessary in order to cover the face of our Fitbits during baseline so that we were not able to monitor our steps. Writing utensils allowed for us to document necessary data. Participants were also asked to cover their Fitbits with tape and sign the tape. This increased treatment fidelity as it ensured the group that each participant was not able to look at the Fitbit to monitor steps throughout the day during baseline. Device for daily internet access allowed for partners to monitor each other's daily steps, and we needed a medium for communication between participant and research partner. During intervention, participants provided their research partner with their daily steps, and their partner in return provided feedback. And our method, behavior and definition. The behavior monitored in the study focuses on each participant's daily steps. The author of the original study defined a step as any activity that resulted in a count being recorded and displayed on the pedometer.
Okay, during data collection and the actual design, we all collected data on a sheet which showed the daily steps and also the weekly steps that were recorded by each participant with a Fitbit account and access through the internet, and then recorded on paper or an Excel sheet. The design was an ABAB reversal design. It was planned for each participant effects of self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback on their number of steps per day. For the baseline, participants wore their Fitbit throughout the day. They were required to have the screen covered with a piece of tape or a sticker that had to sign the tape so the information on the screen could not be seen. The participant sent a picture of the tape-covered Fitbit and the sign device to their partner, showing the attempt to try and look at the steps per day. At least once per week, the participant logged their partner's Fitbit data from their account on either their phone or computer, access their daily step goals. Treatment started once their partner identified that the baseline data was stable, which was indicated by a downward trend or no large variances in the daily totals. Daily steps of each participant were averaged together from the prior week. So for baseline, that average was the treatment one's goal. All participants wore their Fitbit unmasked during the actual treatment and reported their daily step totals at the end of the day to their designated partners by email or text. Their partner then provided them with a brief statement of encouragement or praise following the participants' efforts. If they achieve their goal, continue to help them reach their goal.
Okay. Weekly communication between the participants and their partner took place Visual representation of data in the form of a graph was shared. Verbal discussions, including commenting on the direction of the data points, providing praise and encouragement for the work that they accomplished, and words to help boost their physical activity moving forward. The graph showed data that was up to date and contained goal lines showing their most recent goals. If the participants' daily steps total exceeded the daily step goal on 4 out of the previous 7 days, the goal was considered met. The daily step totals were then averaged, which became the participant's goal for the following week. If the goal was not met, the goal did not increase. Conducted by the partner of each participant on a weekly basis, the researcher logged into their partner's Fitbit account and recorded the daily steps taken by the participant. As the account was synced with the participant's Fitbit, the steps taken every day were automatically updated in their account. The researcher then compared these daily totals to the daily totals reported by the participant. Agreement scores were calculated by dividing the number of agreement scores by the number of agreement plus the number of disagreements and multiplying by 100 in order to obtain a percentage. Inter-observer agreement was 100% for all participants. Method treatment integrity measures for reliability and treatment fidelity was calculated for daily self-monitoring portions and the daily email feedback portion of the intervention by dividing the number of days the participant did not report daily step totals during the intervention by the total numbers of intervention days and multiplying by 100 in order to obtain a percentage. Assessing treatment fidelity was similar. However, there was an added step in order to account for the need of a daily step count from the participant for the treatment to be applied. The number of days that daily feedback was not given, even when a daily step count was provided, was divided by the total number of intervention days and multiplied by 100 in order to obtain that percentage. Treatment integrity was 100% across all participants.
All right, looking at my graph, there was an increase from the first baseline to the intervention, then the data became stable. When returning back to baseline, there was not a significant drop to the original baseline, but it did have a downward trend. During the second intervention, the data does not show an increase from baseline and actually shows a mean value lower than the second baseline. This data on the graph does not show that this intervention was effective for
Guys, I'll share my graph on Wednesday. I don't have the little notes. On my graph, there was no clear evidence of treatment efficacy. While my mean numbers of steps did increase during the first treatment phase, the increase was minimal. My mean number of steps did decrease significantly during the return to baseline phase. However, the mean number of steps during the second phase of treatment did not recover to the original baseline mean. Given more time, data may have shown treatment efficacy.
Yeah, I don't have my speaker notes for this either, but just briefly, I would say, my baseline data, other than for what that one day where it was sort of an outlier, pretty much remained the same. During intervention, the first intervention, my steps did go up somewhat, but when I went back to baseline, they pretty much stayed stable as with the first intervention. With the second intervention, which I was able to do for about 2 weeks, the data shows that it was somewhat stable up until the end, when it showed a downward trend.
Okay, looking at my graph, there was an increase from the first baseline to the intervention phase. Once returning back to baseline, steps decreased, and during the last intervention phase, they slightly increased.
Okay. Can you guys see my graph?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So Annette's data shows a decreasing trend through baseline, which then increased by 23% during the first intervention phase. The mean steps per day during the return to baseline were almost the same as the intervention data, so it was only a decrease of about 4%. When the intervention was introduced for a second time, data increased by 24% from the return to baseline rate and an increase of 47% from the initial baseline rate. Overall, although the intervention appears to be effective in increasing my physical activity, when comparing the mean steps per day, data was fairly unstable, particularly during the return to baseline phase and second intervention phases. So data appears to be trending upward in the return to baseline phase, and it's unclear whether the changes in physical activity can be solely attributed to the intervention.
I showed a significant increase in my daily steps during the first intervention stage and a decrease during the return to baseline. However, the return to baseline phase was limited to only 3 days. And the second phase of intervention did show another increase in the mean number of steps, but the increase was not as significant as the first treatment phase, and the mean did not reach or surpass the mean of the first intervention phase.
So our social validity questionnaire, we created 4 questions as the original article didn't list the questions that they used, so we made up our own. So the 4 questions that were created were, I believe that the daily feedback during intervention encouraged me to achieve my daily goal. I believe that knowing someone else was monitoring my progress motivated me to reach my daily goal. I believe that being able to see my daily steps on the pedometer during intervention, as opposed to not being able to see my daily steps during baseline, worked in my favor for increasing my daily steps. And I believe that this study was effective in increasing my daily physical activity. So each participant rated each of the 4 questions on a scale of 0 to 4. So 0 being strongly disagree, up to a 4 of strongly agree. And then I will talk about, of course, the results of that questionnaire on the next slide, but I'm going to talk for like another 5 or 10 seconds just to fill in the space that I would probably be talking about our results and how amazing they are. So in conclusion, all participants increased physical activity within the first intervention phase. The return to baseline did not necessarily show a decrease in physical activity for all participants. And the same with the second intervention didn't necessarily show an increase in physical activity for all participants. And in that way, our results are dissimilar to the findings of Normand of 2008. So some participants increased their physical activity, but not all, like in Normand's study. And our data was highly variable for all participants, and effects varied between no effect. So at least one participant had similar or decreased means in baseline and the second intervention phases, to some effect that was not maintained. So there was an increase in the mean steps per day within the first intervention phase, but no noticeable changes in the return to baseline phase and subsequent intervention phase, or there was a questionable effect. So for at least one participant, there was an increasing trend in the return to baseline conditions. So the any change in behavior couldn't necessarily be attributed solely to the intervention.
Yeah, we identified several limitations to this replication. One of those being the limited time that we had to complete the replication of the study. If we had longer baseline and intervention phases, we may have been able to show greater, more stable effects. We also had a small sample size. If we had a larger sample size, the effects also could vary. It was a homogeneous sample. We were all female graduate students, so the results could not be generalized to other genders, cultures, races, etc. And the authors did not provide the social validity questions, so we did create our own. In summary, overall, the self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback were not shown to be effective in increasing the number of steps taken per day by 6 graduate students using methods described by Normand in 2008. Further study is warranted that address the limitations identified by the authors.